2020, as Brother Neer would say, wow, wow, wow. It's, I think for me, I'm assuming I'm not the only one, it's sort of a mixed feelings of how is it already December, where did the year go, as well as kind of feeling like it's been a long, slow year. I guess in some ways I don't know that that's necessarily anything specific about 2020. Maybe it's just because of sort of the epicness of the year, all of that seems kind of magnified. It is still kind of hard to believe that there's only about a week or less than a week left in 2020, because at times it felt like 2020 would never end. Although it seems to me that the excitement that's normally around this time for a new year doesn't seem to be quite as much to me right now. I think there's a level of apprehension to going into a new year based on the fact we never expected this year to be the way it is. I kind of feel like we're going into 2021 the way we did when our kids were infants and maybe even toddlers. But as infants, my wife started saying when they were taking a nap, and especially if they would kind of wake up earlier in the nap than they should have, she would say, "Don't make eye contact, don't make eye contact." And I don't know how many times that statement has been made in our house, and now we have made it at times with others and their children when they had sort of stirred from a nap and maybe it wasn't fully time to awaken. So I kind of feel like we're going into 2021 with don't make eye contact, just kind of head down and sheepishly moving in to the new year. But nevertheless, we know that God's got this. I'm sitting in my backyard again. Since the time we first owned a house, we've done a lot of things in the backyard. We've had birthday parties, we've had cookouts, we've had family gatherings, we've had young adult or young married gatherings in the backyard, and we've done campfires in the backyard. And I have to say, I never dreamed before 2020 that the backyard would be a place where I would do a fairly significant amount of ministry. All of the Thought for the Day videos, a lot of them have come from somewhere in my backyard. Needless to say, we've learned to make a lot of adjustments throughout 2020. We've learned to do a lot of things differently. We've learned to manage some things in different ways than we are used to. I was kind of thinking back the last few days about 2020 and some of the uniqueness of the year. We've learned some new words in 2020. We've learned, or we have redefined some words in 2020. I don't ever remember social distancing being a term that I have heard before 2020. I don't ever recall social distancing, and now there's hardly been a day go by for months that that phrase doesn't come up, that someone isn't referencing social distancing. You can't go into a store now without being confronted by stickers on the floor that remind you to stay 6 feet apart. We now are, the word quarantine has become a very familiar word to us. And I don't know, quarantine to me was usually something you heard in the movies, some kind of movie where there was an outbreak and they were talking about that. And now we have all had an experience with what it means to quarantine, with the stay-at-home order that we had earlier in the year, now to individuals quarantining because of exposure to COVID-19 or being diagnosed with COVID-19. Quarantine is it's now a normal part of our vocabulary as well. There's another word that I think up until 2020, most of the time I heard or used this word, it was usually when a child had a car and you were playing around with them, and you would say zoom, zoom. And we've said zoom, 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 zoom many times. In fact, more times than I would like this year. We now know Zoom to be the way in which we can still connect in some form or fashion, and never would have imagined. I've used Zoom a couple times before 2020. But never would have imagined it would be such a regular part of my life. And I know there's some of you that with work, you've actually had to do more Zoom calls than I've had. And God bless you, because the amount I've had to do has worn on my patience. And I am thankful, as I've said several times through this year, I'm thankful for technology and the way it has provided us the opportunity to still connect, to still communicate. But again, it's just not the same as being together. Of course, probably the biggest word of 2020 is Corona, COVID-19, but I think we say Corona as much as we say COVID. And I don't know about you, I've never drank it, but up until this year, Corona, I always thought of a beer, and now it's a virus, which I don't know, seems kind of appropriate that they're both named the same thing, but we'll leave that for another time, another day. What's interesting is, and of course I didn't do this before 2020, but I would imagine that pre-2020, pre-COVID-19, if you were to Google Corona, you more than likely would have gotten the beer show up on your Google search. And I actually did this a couple of days ago. In light of this, in preparing for this this video, I did a Google search of the word Corona, and the beer did not even show up on the first page. If you were going to get Corona beer, you had to add beer into it. Otherwise, the whole first page is nothing but Corona in the context of COVID-19. I think, when you deal with your small children, sometimes you talk about the S word or the F word, and I think we now have the C word that's become a part of our vocabulary that we don't really want to say, we don't want to hear, and yet, at least for now, it's still such a part of our world. And of course, how can I go through all of this and not mention masks? I mean, pre-2020, masks were what bank robbers wore, and people in hazmat suits in some kind of dangerous situation, and now we all wear masks. I was in San Francisco back in September visiting Timothy for a couple days for his 21st birthday, and we were downtown San Francisco. And if you've ever been to a large metro city like New York, D.C., they're two of the places around here that I've experienced this, but there's other metro cities where as you walk down the street, there'll be people set up on the street with tables of merchandise, and two of the sort of the common things I've seen is sunglasses and purses, and they're knockoff sunglasses and knockoff purses, and so you can get this name brand purse for really cheap because it's not actually the real thing. And what was really just kind of fitting for 2020 is when I was in San Francisco, we were walking around downtown, and wouldn't you know it, they had large displays set up selling masks, and a lot of them had the more expensive name brands on the mask. Of course, I didn't know there were knockoff masks, but just goes to show you so many things that have now become a common part of our world. And I will tell you, and I hope I don't offend any of you, but I can't wait for the day that I can get rid of all my masks. In fact, I think I may throw a mask burning party. If any of you want to join me in that party, you can let me know. Of course, we've also, we've learned to value some things, I think, in 2020 more, and I will probably touch on this a little bit later, but I know for me, the church and my family, while I have already greatly valued them, this year has contributed to me, and I believe many of you, recognizing even more the importance and the significance of church, the church family, and our natural families. But of course, I think really close to the top of the list, the thing that we have learned to value in 2020 is toilet paper. And who would have ever thought that toilet paper would be such a hot commodity that we would worry about stockpiling toilet paper? I was in Chesapeake, Virginia when the week before things are kind of the weekend. In fact, the last Sunday service before quarantine, where we had some people in the building. I had been in Chesapeake, Virginia for a seminar that week, and I'm out of town, and my wife calls me to say, go see if you can find toilet paper and bring toilet paper home. I would have never in a million years imagined that being out of town, the thing my wife would call me to go look for and try to find would be toilet paper. And so we've learned to value some things that we have taken for granted in the past. There's probably some other things based on your experiences, your family, your work that you've done that are now more of a common part of your life or vocabulary. So I want you to do this. If you're watching right now with somebody, if you're gathered together with somebody, I want you to hit pause on the video and just take a few minutes and maybe add to this list of things that I've thrown out. And once you do that, hit play, and we'll pick up from there. Well, did you guys come up with a few additional things for the list of craziness from 2020? I've changed locations back to another very familiar location from this year. I guess another location, I could say, like the backyard, where have done some ministry things that never really imagined. I know it's pretty common for a new church to start in a home, in a living room, but it's kind of unusual for an established church to sort of have church from the living room, and we have done that numerous times now this year. I was thinking back to, I guess, some of the times of streaming from the living room and a few epic moments, anything from sweating Leo popping up in the middle of the live stream to the Keurig gargling out the last few drops of a cup of coffee right before we were trying to go live, and some of the family tension moments before the live stream started, and we all had our smiles on. Of course, I think the most epic moment I recall out of all of that was the infamous FedEx delivery in the middle of a Sunday evening live stream, as I glanced out of the corner of my eye and saw the truck stop and began to process what was happening. And I guess it was all kind of good until the delivery guy kind of looked into the big bay window, and we made eye contact with me standing in my living room with a coat and tie, speaking to sort of no one. But I think one of the things we've learned, I know I've learned, and I'm hoping and pretty sure many of you can say the same thing. We've said for years, we've preached it, we've talked about the fact that church is not confined to a building. It's not confined to a location. God is not restricted to a certain setting, a certain type of place. And wow, some of the manifestations of the presence of God that we felt in our living room as we worshiped, especially some of those times during quarantine. And I know for some of you, because some of you communicated with my wife, and you shared how that you felt such an awesome presence of God. And I think that's really important. I think one of the things we've done this year, obviously not intentionally, it was we were sort of forced into doing it. But we have proven some things this year that we have proclaimed in the past, as we have had to adjust at various times to how we do things. We have, I believe, truly experienced that God really remains the same, and that He is omnipresent, and is able to minister to us in all kinds of ways, and is not at all restricted by the circumstances that we may find ourselves in. I really feel like, and I think I've said this several times, preaching, teaching the last several months, we have spent a lot of time, many of us, and myself included, have spent a lot of time focused on all the negatives and the challenges of 2020. And again, not only COVID, but we went through the great racial turmoil in the summertime, and really don't think that's fully subsided, but thankfully some of the circumstances surrounding that have settled down some. And then of course our presidential election, which is even as of now, I think technically, depending who you listen to, but technically undecided or yet to be officially determined. And also, as I've said numerous times throughout the year, in addition to all of those things that we're kind of all affected by, every one of us have gone through some challenging things on a personal level. But the one thing I've realized, maybe the last couple of weeks especially, is that actually in the middle of all of this, in the middle of all the negative things we could talk about from 2020, God has done some really amazing things this year. And so I want to share a few of them with you. And this is by no means a list that includes all. In fact, I was just talking to someone yesterday that was telling me how awesome of a year 2020 has been for them and things that God has done for them. And so I'm going to share a few testimonies and of some folks that in the last couple of days emailed me testimonies that they were willing for me to share with you. And so these are just some of the highlights of what God has done. And no particular order, not in any order of significance or importance here. So Brother Bert Rue, wow. He had a accident in which he cut off his thumb, and on the way to the hospital ended up in a very severe car accident, broken legs, in addition to the hand injury, and just a couple of weeks ago came walking into service without out of his wheelchair, and showed me also that he's beginning to get use of that thumb again, and so what an awesome demonstration of the power of God in his life. Brother Charlin shared with me that he had a friend who has come to church, got baptized, got the Holy Ghost during all of this, as well as his mother's dealt with some health issues, some significant health concerns, but God has worked that out, taking care of that. And then also his family has been attempting to get the approval needed to come to the U.S. and be able to live with him, live in the States, and all of that has fallen into place the last couple of months, and they're now going to be able to join him here in the States. Sister Carol Feldkamp shared with me that she's worked for the same boss for 7 years, and 4 of those years she received no productivity award due to her boss not liking her. Her boss quit suddenly this year, and she shared with the director the tumultuous relationship that she had with her boss, and the director gave her 4 years of past production awards plus this year's award. And she says, hold your peace and let the Lord fight your battles. God is good. Sister Yolanda Glass shared earlier in the year the Lord healed her mother of cancer, and that was only found out because she suffered a heart attack and had to be life flighted back to the States from Jamaica. And had it not been for the heart attack, the doctors would have never seen the tumor that was in her abdomen. So just blessings in the midst of adversity. She also shared that her and her husband haven't lost any wages throughout all of this. In fact, they've increased their income through some various means throughout all of this crisis. They as well, a couple that they've known for several years, have gotten baptized this year, and excited to see again that in the midst of all of this adversity, God is touching hearts and lives. She also shared that her daughter Elizabeth, and her brother all were diagnosed with COVID, and they've made it through it. And she shared that actually Elizabeth Heavenly Joy made it through COVID with basically no symptoms. So again, all kinds of negative, but I declared, because I felt like the Lord told me to, that this was the year of Jubilee, and needless to say, it hasn't gone the way we imagined, but God has still been faithful. Sister Ramika Branham shared that when the virus first broke out, she told her husband that if she got it, she wouldn't make it. She's had asthma since she was a child and has been in and out of the hospital for it. Well, she got COVID and she's still here. While she had some troublesome symptoms, she never had to go to the hospital, and she had peace through all of it. She said, only God could give me that kind of peace. 4 out of their 5 kids got sick, but all with minor symptoms. In addition to that, her husband, Daniel, as many of you know, is self-employed, works construction, and so he ended up having to be home for a couple of weeks through all of this. But there were some very significant financial blessings that God had orchestrated at just the right time for them to be able to make it through all of that. And then also Sister Sophie, who shared in service recently the miracle of her son Nathaniel. Nathaniel survived COVID, and according to the doctors, he should have died from it. They didn't expect it. If he got it, he would make it through, and yet he did. Earlier in the year, she went back to work. She had surgery, but went back to work prior to really being fully recovered, and only worked for 2 weeks, and that's when everything was shut down. That gave her more time to heal, to stay at home, and still get paid. She also received the hours of the person who provides care for Nathaniel several times a week, which was an additional financial blessing to her. She was able to do more fixing up in the house, buying needed tools, lumber, paint, etc. Plus, she enjoys staying home with her son. She said, in a way, COVID was a blessing in disguise. So again, I know huge challenges this year, and there are others that I'm aware of who got raises on their jobs this year. There are others that got new jobs, better jobs this year. There's people that got new houses and new cars and other blessings. And I will insert, I know that, again, we've all had our challenges. I don't know of a person that hasn't had challenges, but I just felt that it was extremely important as we are winding down this year to realize that there is a whole lot of good that has gone on in 2020 in spite of all the negativity. I don't think we've actually set a figure yet, and I'm a little bit reluctant because I don't want to freak some of you out, but I think it's a testimony. In the last several weeks, we've had 75 or so people, that's not an exact number, but we've had 75 people who got COVID, either were tested positive or didn't get the test but had all of the symptoms that are associated with COVID, and a very high percentage of all of those made it through with fairly minor symptoms. And of course, we've had several that have been hospitalized, and as we've said now, reported 5 out of the 8 that were originally hospitalized have gone back home. The others that are still in the hospital are progressing, and we're getting good reports, and there's still some challenges, but God is at work. And so I know to some that may be a little overwhelming and may kind of, I don't know, maybe freak you out a little bit, but I'm sorry. I think that's an amazing testimony of how many of us God has brought us through. As I said on Realm weeks ago, the same power that's able to keep us from something is the same power that is able to take us through something. And so I'm very thankful, obviously, for all of those things. Those are some awesome testimonies of the greatness of God in the midst of all of this adversity. But the Bible tells us it's not all of those things that God rejoices or that heaven rejoices over. Heaven rejoices over a sinner that repents. Heaven rejoices when someone that's gone astray comes back home. And I don't know exact figures for the year, but we've had a significant number of people get baptized, receive the Holy Ghost throughout 2020. And I just want to mention a couple of specifics, and if I leave you out, if you're one of the new folks and I leave you out, please forgive me. I'm just kind of really truthfully doing what I feel like the Lord impressed upon me to share, and so I'm just going to reference a couple of the specifics. The Atkinson brothers came, believe back in I think it was end of summer, if I'm not mistaken, and they had heard about Bishop Wright through someone they were connected to online, and they got introduced to his ministry online, and I got to tell you, I think what's pretty amazing is the very first message of Bishop Wright's that they watched was the 7 horrors of hell. That's some pretty serious meat to start out with, and what's amazing is those two guys just ate that message up. They weren't freaked out by it. They weren't turned off by it. They thought it was amazing, and a couple months after that, Jacob K, the Lord orchestrated it for him to come be a part of Antioch. And I just have to tell you, and I'm not don't want to make anybody upset here or cause anybody to be offended with me, but these 3 guys in particular, man, the level of hunger for God that each of them have is just, it is amazing to see. It is so inspiring and encouraging. And so again, in spite of all of the adversity, the chaos, the confusion that we've dealt with, the uncertainty, God has been doing some awesome things. And then there's some that have come home in 2020, like my friend that I've grown up with since I was a kid, Albert Jones, and Brother Brian Evans. Wow, what a highlight of the year, seeing what God has been doing in Brian's life. And then others that God has brought in, and they were already saved, but they've come. And one of the other ones that I really have been so blessed by and encouraged by in 2020 is Brother Tony Artale. Wow, what a awesome thing! And of course, if you don't know, he was one through one of the other new things of 2020. We now have a brand new ministry at Antioch. It's the Waivers, and of course, Brother Lewis and some folks have they've been down on the highway before church for several years doing that, but all of that's expanded, and as many of you know, they go downtown, they go to West Street, they go other locations and stand and hold up that big sign that has the name that is above every other name on it and wave. And they actually had somebody that came up to them and handed them $100 bill or $100 to use towards what they were doing. But back to Brother Tony, he was heading to church one Sunday morning several months ago and just stopped down on the highway, talked to those guys. I think they prayed together, and shortly after that he came and visited, and has been coming ever since. And it is amazing to see. Again, I'm not pointing fingers at you, because I've done the same thing. I have spent way more time than I would like to have to admit this year, bemoaning circumstances and challenges and situations. And here we are, and we had Thanksgiving was interrupted, and all of our plans for Thanksgiving changed, and things are having to be modified and altered for the holidays of Christmas, and it's easy to get caught up in focusing on all of that. But as the old song says, when I think of the goodness of Jesus and all that he's done for me, my soul cries out, hallelujah. So I want you to, in just a moment here, pause again. And if you are joined together with some folks, if you're watching this with friends or family right now, I want you to pause the video, and I want you to just share a few minutes of what maybe God has done for you. The things God has done in your life this year, testimonies, maybe some blessings in your family, some things God has done in your home. If you're watching right now and you're by yourself, and there's got nobody else with you, I want you to get out a pen and a piece of paper and write down some of the things that God has done for you in 2020. Maybe you don't have some of these sort of bigger testimonies like some of these others. Some of these what we would look at as being kind of really significant testimonies. The bottom line is we all have something to be thankful about at this point in time. So go ahead, hit the pause button, and when you've spent a few minutes doing that, hit the play button again. Well, welcome back. I hope you were able to come up with some things in your life, your family, that are some testimonies from this year, things that God has done in your own lives personally. I'm now in my second favorite place in the world. My first most favorite place is home. Not necessarily the physical house itself, but more so wherever the place my family is currently living. This is this hill has been probably one of my most favorite places in all of my life. I've spent more time here than any place but my home. And of course, as was the case with so many things, our time here, our opportunities to be here this year have been limited. And then when we were together, we've followed guidelines and distancing and not done the things that we are used to. I said it already, but I know we have learned this year, we have experienced, I say it that way, we have experienced this year how powerfully the presence of God can be manifested in our homes and in other settings. But that doesn't take away for me the value of this place. I will say again, I know what we do is not about it's not about a location, it's not about a set building or place, but I believe this is a very important part of what we do, and I acknowledge that in the future we may have even more challenges of doing the things we're used to doing here even than we've had this year. But in addition to not only experiencing the presence of God in other places, but again, and I think especially to me in this setting, because as I said, we have not, for the most part, with the exception of a couple of times, since we started back up in June, we have not really conducted ourselves in here in the manner in which we're used to. We haven't conducted ourselves with the freedom that we're used to, the freedom of worship, the freedom to minister to one another, lay hands on one another. And so I think another encouraging thing to me taking from this year is not only have we learned location is not necessarily all that important per se. How could I go through all of this video and not also recollect for a moment about drive-in Easter service? And I just saw a clip the other day, a video clip from the drone footage, and once again, there was so many awesome things about that drive-in service day. We hadn't seen each other for weeks, but It was amazing to me looking at the aerial shot and the way the cars were parked and how absolutely perfectly it was lined up to the diagram that had been drawn up or created in advance. And then, of course, the drive-through prayer meeting. Wow, that was a really unique experience for me. I'm assuming for those of you that came, and then, of course, outdoor services. And so, again, not only learning, experiencing firsthand that God's presence is not limited to this facility, but also that we can adapt. And it took us a couple of weeks when we first started gathering back together here in the sanctuary for I think I could say it this way, which maybe is a little bit ironic, but it took a little while for people to breathe, which I think that's one of the things we're all concerned about with COVID is the breathing. But we learned more and more, and of course we're still following most of those guidelines and learning that God is not limited in any capacity in where and how He moves, how He works. And I got to tell you, I think that should be such a reassuring thing to us, to be able to come through this year with the certainty that God is bigger than every adversity, bigger than every challenge that we may face, and that He's made a way. He's made a way. And there have been a lot of times this year I've never had to face some of the challenges that I have faced from a pastoral perspective, and some of the decisions that had to be made this year. And I didn't always know in advance what we were going to have to do, what the answer was, but I believe God came through every time, and I am extremely grateful for that. I think in all of this, whether it's location of where we've been for services, meaning online or here in the sanctuary, and all of these variables that we face, there is a constant. There is a constant through all of that. And that constant to me is the presence of God. I feel like I'm probably not the only one whose appreciation and value for the presence of God has also increased this year. And I'm not talking about, some kind of just surface emotional feeling. In fact, I'm talking about kind of God's presence when you're not necessarily feeling something. You wouldn't say that I'm feeling the presence of God, but you've got the confidence, the faith, and the certainty that the presence of God is surrounding you. One of the common struggles I think we have in our walk with God is when things aren't going well, or what we would consider to be well, when we're going through adversity, when we're going through times like we've gone through this year. We often equate that with the presence of God, or I guess more accurately in this context would be a lack of the presence of God. When we deal with difficulties, when we go through sickness, when we go through the loss of a loved one, we can fall very easily into the trap of questioning, where are you, God? And again, that's, I think, a fairly common thing that most believers deal with, hopefully not regularly, but we've all probably experienced it at some point. And it's an age-old struggle, measuring the presence of God, defining the love of God by the circumstances. It's a weakness of our human nature. And one of the places in Scriptures to me that is such a great demonstration of this is found in the book of Job. And of course, I'm Most of you know the story fairly well. We've had what probably many would call a bad year, and Job had what was the bad days of bad days, losing all of his possessions, losing 7 sons and 3 daughters, all in one single accident. And so in Job's journey through this trial, there's something Job says in Job 29, and I'm going to read it just for the sake of not taking too long. I'm just going to read it from the Message Bible. I'd encourage you to go back later and reread these verses from a couple of other translations and just kind of get a broader perspective on what Job is saying here. But again, from the Message Bible, Job 29 and verse 1. Job now resumed his response. Oh how I long for the good old days when God took such very good care of me. Is that not where many of us have been throughout this year? Longing for the good old days. And again, notice Job said, I long for the good old days because that's when God took such very good care of me. Verse number 3, He always held a lamp before me, and I walked through the dark by its light. Oh, how I miss those golden years when God's friendship graced my home, when the Mighty One was still by my side and my children were all around me, when everything was going my way and nothing seemed too difficult, when I walked downtown and sat with my friends in the public square. Let's rephrase that for 2020, when I was able to go out and not have to social distance from everybody around me. Job was equating God's presence, God's favor, God's care with his circumstances. Job was looking back when things in his life were a certain way. He was looking back at those days when those 7 sons and 3 daughters were gathered around him. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with Job sort of recollecting over the past. But I think the key thing here is Job missed. You don't have to go back to the good old days, Job, to find where God was, where God took care of you. You don't have to go back in time to find out where his lamp went before you. In fact, I will testify to that. Wow, I believe it's been God's lamp that has guided us. The psalmist says, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And part of the context of that verse is that the lamp to my feet and the light to my path, it basically only illuminates the next step or the next few steps. It does not brighten up the path like it's the middle of the day. And while we have been in some dark times this year, while we've gone through some difficulties, I believe his lamp has still gone before us. How I miss those golden years when God's friendship graced my home. Now, of course, you and I know the whole story. We know the end of Job's life. We know the way God restored him. We know the way that God blessed him. But Job here is still kind of in the middle of all of that. And so what you and I can look at is we can say, hey, Job, I know you're looking at where you are and what's going on and wondering where God is, but he's no further from you in the midst of all of this adversity and uncertainty in your life. He's no further to you then than he was in those good times. In fact, I've sort of come to the, maybe I could say belief, I don't know. I've come to the opinion that the times God is actually the nearest to us The times in which God's presence, and again, I don't mean some surface feeling, emotion that we may have, but when God's presence is with us, that the times it is the strongest and the most effective is when we're really not even aware it's there. Because the times in which that often happens is in the midst of our challenges, our adversities, our valleys, the difficulties. So again, whatever the setting, whatever the location, whatever the circumstances, the constant is the presence of God. The word presence, or the word presence in the scripture, means the face as the part that turns. The face as the part that turns. The root word of that means to turn. By implication, to face, to appear, to look. I read these verses in service recently, but in Exodus 33 and verse number 14, Moses is in the midst of his conversation with God, and God is sending him to Egypt. And the Lord says to Moses, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And Moses responds, and he says unto him, "If your presence doesn't go with me, then carry us not up hence." So God says, my presence is going to be with you, but Moses says, to me, Moses said, "Thanks, God, but let's kind of get this straight. If it doesn't go, I don't want to go. If I don't have your face turning towards me, if I don't have you looking at me," it kind of reminds me also of a word I referenced this past Sunday morning, and that's the word favor. It's part of the song we've sung numerous times throughout this year. And again, that word favor, the root word of favor, means in Scripture is to bend or stoop in kindness to an inferior. To bend or stoop in kindness to an inferior. And so in the middle of all of the crisis we face this year, again, whether it's COVID, racism, political issues, and then all the stuff, I will tell you, COVID aside, racism, politics aside, this has been one of the most challenging years of my life. In some ways, I've looked at COVID a few times as just kind of being the kindergarten stuff that we've faced and I've been through this year. But I believe today that throughout all of that, His face, His presence, His face is turned toward us. Part of the significance of that to me is if somebody's face is turned towards you, that means you have their attention. That's why in conversations we oftentimes struggle. We're talking to somebody and they're looking all over the place. They're on their phone. They're doing stuff. There's times at which I may be doing something on my phone or my iPad, and my wife will be talking to me, and because I'm doing that, she doesn't think I'm listening, and sometimes she'll stop talking because she didn't think I was listening. And did you know I was talking to you? Yes. And then I'll repeat back what she says. But you know what? I've never really found her to ever, in 28 plus years of marriage, to ever question me if I was listening to her when we were sitting face to face. When I was looking into her eyes, she was looking into, she knew she had my attention. And so if you've got His face towards you, His favor is upon you. And so He is stooping in kindness to you. Last year for our New Year's Eve service, it was a song we sang for the first time here. I don't know if last year's when the song came out or not. The first time I ever recall hearing the song, I was preaching at CLC in Imesville, Maryland, and they sang this song as a part of the worship that day. And it's one of those songs, at least for me, where kind of from the first time I hear it, it just sticks. And I'm pretty sure, I think I put in a request for this song going into New Year's Eve service, not knowing really the significance. We've also sung this a number of times throughout the year, and that song is titled Not Afraid. I want to read you a couple of the lines again, refresh some of you, and others of you, maybe you've never heard the song before. The chorus says, "When I walk through the waters, I won't be overturned. When I go through the rivers, I will not be drowned. My God will make a way, so I am not afraid. When I am in the fire, I will not feel the flame. I'll stand before the giant, declaring victory. My God will make a way, so I am not afraid." As I look back to the New Year's Eve service last year and think about the fact that we sung this song, it seems to me as though it was almost as if God was, through a song, prophetically speaking to us, because obviously you and I had no idea what this year was going to hold, but God knew it from the beginning of time. And then I think this is probably I love the whole song, but this part especially, I love the bridge. Before me, behind me, always beside me. No shadow, no valley where you won't find me. No, I am not afraid. Before me, behind me, always beside me. That's obviously referencing his presence. Again, there's a number of things we've learned this year. I think there are things we're going to take away from this year collectively that we've learned, and then there's the individual things that God has taught each one of us. And my hope, and this is my hope for myself, quite honestly, but it's also my hope for all of us in this congregation, that as we move forward into the future and whatever the future holds, that we can truly not be afraid. Because we can look back and see, no matter what we go through, no matter what challenges we face, no matter what obstacles there may be, his presence is an absolute constant. I know from a natural perspective in our flesh, there are hopes and desires that we all have. As I said earlier in the video, I look forward to not having to wear a mask. I can't wait to not have to worry about wearing a mask every time you go out someplace in public. And there's other things that we're hopeful of, and I would imagine there are going to be some things that will change and kind of be a little bit more like we're used to, but I am in no way sitting here today thinking that we're going back to life as we used to know it fully. We may, but it seems more and more unlikely. And so if somehow we could move forward with the certainty that no matter what my circumstances are, no matter what we're going through, no matter what we face, God's presence is going to be with me. And if God's presence is going to be with me, there really is no reason to be afraid. I've said this numerous times and I'll say it again. My favorite verse in the scripture is in the book of Job, chapter 42 and verse number 5. And it basically says, Job was speaking and he says, I heard of you with my ears, and now I've seen you with my own eyes. We know that faith comes by hearing, so faith always begins with hearing. Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the Word of God. But I believe there's another level of faith that is a much stronger level of faith, and that is the level of faith that comes from seeing. I can't have faith without first hearing. But I have to tell you, a faith that is based on hearing alone can, to a degree, be a shakeable faith. But I got to tell you, a faith that is based on what I've seen God do, a faith that is based on the prayers that I've prayed that God has answered, there's really no way for the enemy to undermine that faith. And I'm sure some of us probably, if we could go back to the beginning of this year and we had the power to change things and avoid things that have happened and avoid the outbreak of this virus, there's probably those that would. But I believe if we could come out of this year with the lessons that God has taught us, with the things that God has shown us, we probably could then reach the point to say, you know what? If I could go back and not have to go through what we went through, I wouldn't take that option because of how valuable the things that God has taught us. Another verse that I quoted recently or read recently in service, the Lord said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I hope and pray that your relationship with God is solidified, not weakened, not damaged, but is solidified by this year. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I hope and pray that some things that have been said, that they are a blessing, a benefit to you and your family. God bless you. I look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Once was a man with all the possessions that this world could hold. The father's riches seemed to overflow, but all he wanted was you. A blameless man who feared God turned away from evil. The greatest man his land had ever known, but all he wanted was you. The tempter came to try to set the Lord against his soul, to strip away all that he'd ever owned, but all he wanted was you. Yeah, just you. Just you. The servants come one by one to tell him all the news, that everything has been lost, there's nothing left to you. ground. He rips his shirt and starts to shave his head. Looks to the sky and then somehow he says, all I need is you. Then boils come one by one. He's covered head to toe. Among the ashes still somehow he knows, all I need is you. God and die, so she says, but does she really know that shall we take good from God and not evil? Not evil from you. They travel for days to give him counsel now, but they don't know what they say, they only tear him down. He starts to question their ways, it seems they've led him wrong. But then he starts to complain, that's when we hear the sound. A voice that comes from the wind is here to question you. And since you tried to contend, I hope you hear the truth, that all the wind, stars and skies, the raging seas, the waters rise, you can't deny I'm the one that all this has come through. Cause I'll always be, and I've always been, wherever you've gone, I've been with you then. Humble your heart, fall on your knees, trust in my ways when still you can't see. When I can't see, I trust you. This man we know named as Joe, he falls into the ground, covers his hand to his mouth so words won't utter out. My God, your wonderful ways no man can understand. So now I'll give you my days, cause all I need is you.